Svet, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Really excited to unpick your career journey, not just your Salesforce journey, but there's a few interesting topics I have for you before the world of Salesforce, and then we'll kind of uncover how you've gone through the Salesforce ecosystem and recently become a CTA. So congratulations on that as well. I know it was a couple of months back, but yeah, huge congrats.
I appreciate that, and thanks for the opportunity to tell my story.
Yeah, so let's get into your story. And if you've listened to any of these before, you'll know I like to look kind of right back and kind of explore how you've ended up where you are today. So can you tell me a little bit about your background, your education, early career, career aspirations, those kind of things?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we go all the way back, I guess. So my mom was a concert pianist, and I thought I was going to be a concert pianist too. And my dad was a fighter pilot back in the day. And I also had those aspirations as a kid. And then basically my mom said, you know what, you're quite good at languages. So at some point you will probably end up using your languages. And so back in 1994, I ended up moving to the United States, and lo and behold, went from Russia to the United States. So yes, I've been using at least this language, and I learned a few others along the way. But my education has primarily always been centered around liberal arts. And so I do have a bachelor's degree in international affairs. I have a master's degree in diplomacy and international relations. I have a minor in Russian literature, and minor in German literature. I also speak a bit of Spanish and Polish, mostly because of my wife. And I have a degree in concert piano performance. So nowhere do you see anything related to technology in my education. So that's basically perhaps I'm not that different from a few of the CTAs, but that's not the norm.
So what did you decide you wanted to do? Like you obviously you studied, but what was your career path when you'd come out of education? What was it that you thought, right, this is what I'm going to kind of go for?
I originally thought I was going to be a lawyer. So actually straight out of college, I became a paralegal. So I was working in a law firm, and it was not exactly for me. I decided that it's a fine career for someone else. Like, for instance, my daughter is interested in becoming a lawyer. She's quite certain that's what she's going to end up being. But I quickly figured out this is really not for me. So I went back to school. So I came out of the graduate school, and then I was like, okay, now what? So I tried many different things, sales-related things, everything having to do with communication and people and public speaking. And for quite some time, for at least 9 years or so, I was in international consulting here in Washington, D.C. And I was working with groups invited by Department of State in International Visitors Leadership Program. And so I would give lectures on the subjects of limited government, separation of powers, cultural differences between the former Soviet Union and the United States. And I would also give these cultural invitations and tours of the city, Washington, D.C., that is. And so I've done that for quite a while. And so that was the public speaking part that actually helped me hone my presentation skills at the time. So fast forward from that, I decided to try my hand at entrepreneurship. And so I co-founded a company with a business partner of mine, which ended up being called Touchdown Space, because the company for which I was working actually was located in one of the shared space environments before co-working was a thing. So basically, you'd have a full floor of the building, and each separate office was rented out to separate companies. And so I had one of those offices. And then we figured, okay, so what if we were to make this type of office environment available for anyone to be able to book almost in any participating center and for meeting purposes, not just to rent by the month or by the year, but actually by the hour. So just a meeting room by the hour, and you don't have to sign a contract. And so we were pretty early to the game, and we were able to construct the proof of concept, and was actually working product. So we had the largest inventory in the world at the time. However, it was very difficult to convince our participating companies that they kind of needed us as a platform to rent their space. They thought they could do it themselves. So that business really never took off. And I thinking about it right now, maybe it's for the best because COVID would have shut us down anyway. Because nobody was going to the office, nobody was having meetings. And nowadays, the office space is definitely a lot cheaper than it used to be. And there's a lot less demand for that sort of thing. People are more used to working from home like you and I are doing right now. So that was my entrepreneurship journey. And that's probably the hardest thing that I've ever tried to do. I would even say that it was harder than the CTA. But that did teach me quite a few interesting lessons. And probably the most valuable lesson was believing in myself and being resilient. And so that actually is what carried me through the journey to CTA.
Yeah, I guess it's there are similarities in some ways, right? Because with entrepreneurship, like you have so many different things thrown at you. You're kind of having to build the plane as you fly it. Like you're having to adapt. You're having to overcome challenges regularly, which I guess is similar to, in some ways, to tackling the review board, right? It's you got a million things thrown at you. You've got to have a clear head. You've got to knuckle down and take every distraction out and just focus on the task in front of you.
The biggest thing is learning how to fail, and learning how to fail fast, and learning from those mistakes, and not being afraid of failure. I think that's the biggest part of why certain people make it through and a lot of people don't. And that's not just CTA, that's like becoming Navy SEAL. Anything that's worth having, that's worth doing, worth really fighting for. It's basically saying, okay, so maybe it's not this time, but next time I'll be better, and eventually you succeed. So I didn't invent this, but this is what I've actually proven to myself that it's true.
Yeah.
So I did not succeed as an entrepreneur, but I learned a lot of lessons which I've applied in my Salesforce career so far.
Yeah, nice. So I guess a lot of people listening to this now are thinking you've gone from, because it wasn't like you weren't in that role prior to being an entrepreneur for a short period of time, right? You kind of had a career, you had a decent amount of time in a career before then transitioning into being an entrepreneur to then going into becoming a Salesforce professional. So how did that transition take shape, and how did you land on Salesforce as being the platform or the next stage of your career?
Well, the transition was actually quite abrupt and quite necessary. And so it kind of went like this. So when I realized that this business wasn't going to survive, I needed a job. And incidentally, I was able to get a job with a British company called the Census. And the Census actually was the technology provider to shared office space companies. So they themselves did not build software, but they kind of had this. They had software to orchestrate hardware. So if you wanted to turn on your internet from the browser and administer all the different components of telephony in the office center, that's what they basically sold and created. And so they used Salesforce, and I was hired to actually sell. At the same time, I said, when I was interviewing, I said, it's interesting that you guys use Salesforce because we also used Salesforce with a touchdown space. But I didn't say that we used the group edition of Salesforce, which is like the cheapest and most entry-level edition possible at the time. And so that kind of resonated with the person who was interviewing. And he just opened the US office, and he was the head of the US office. And it's like, okay, cool. So very quickly, he said, you know what? I think you will be better at Salesforce than you are at selling. So why don't you try that? And I said, okay, so what you're saying is that you don't have an administrator. He said, yes, we don't have an administrator. So kind of like, okay, the first thing I asked of a CTO is, do you guys, can I get a sandbox? Because you asked me to do all these changes. And like, mind you, at that point, I really only knew how to convert a lead to an account contact and an opportunity. That's it. And so he said, well, sandbox, that's going to be a problem because we already have 2 sandboxes. And I'm like, this doesn't sound right. So I was literally making changes in production. And they would ask me like, oh, what is this field for? I would ask, like, you have all these fields. What is this one for? I don't know. Let's just delete it. Okay, no problem. Not realizing that, of course, all the data will be gone as well. The reporting will be impossible and so on and so forth. And I'm not just talking about deleting it from the layout. I mean, just like deleting it, period. So it was the wildest thing. It was a Wild West. And I remember something took me 2 weeks to create that now it would probably take me like, I don't know, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, because I just didn't know what was going on. And so fast forward about 3 months after that. So when my contract was up, it was just a very short contract. They said, we're actually going to be divesting ourselves from Salesforce completely. We're just going to be using HubSpot instead. And I said, I understand. Okay, so basically they didn't renew my contract. But what had happened during those 3 months is that I caught the bug, the Salesforce bug. So I decided, you know what? I can be good at this. And I decided to make that my career because I just needed to decide what I was going to do with the rest of my life. And I said to myself, this feels right. I obviously failed at entrepreneurship and I don't want to go back to doing cultural orientations, but this is something that I can get behind. And so this was March of 2016. So I was just reading your LinkedIn post where you said that you placed somebody whom you met 9 years ago. So that predates my whole Salesforce career, right? So March of 2016, I decided that I'm going to get serious about Salesforce. And what did that mean? It meant that I would go through Trailhead and learn as many things as I could. So basically, I went basic, intermediate, and advanced admin trails. Then I spoke to a whole lot of people, was introduced to a friend who worked at Salesforce, and he was an account executive, and his wife was working at Acumen Solutions. And she was basically a business analyst who will also do a lot of Salesforce training, so change management. So I spoke to both of them and said, yeah, you can do this. You can do this. And they said, so the most important thing you can do right now is go get certified. So I said, okay. So I looked at the certification. I'm like, well, $200, that's expensive. For me at that time, that was like really, that was expensive. And mind you, no job, right? At the time. So I said, okay, I can do this. And I went through all these trails and then I was like, there must be something more to it. So all the Salesforce courses were super expensive, thousands of dollars. So I'm like, I can't even touch that with a 10-foot pole. So then I came across certifiedondemand.com. And that course was $50 at the time. I think it's 60 now. Well worth it. It's just meant for people to get through and be able to pass the admin exam. So I went through that whole course. It took me 2 months. And then I found every single available mock exam. So I remember I even paid for a Salesforce Bands mock exam that came out. Then there was a free one that I found. So basically I was like, okay, so I paid my $200. I went to a testing center and I passed my admin exam. And I felt like, oh my God, this is just like impossible. I achieved what I couldn't. I achieved something that I didn't think was going to be possible. And at the time I was also interviewing at places. And so I just remember saying in the interview that, yes, and I have the certification. I'm the Salesforce admin certified. And my friend said, you did the right thing because at least now the people who are hiring you, as well as the recruiters, would know at least where to value you or how to value you because you have one cert as opposed to everybody else out there with no certs. And I said, okay, cool. And then I got hired basically. So I started in August of 2016 as a senior business analyst.
You mentioned before, like obviously throughout your career and education to that point, there was no mention of technology, right? And I guess, would you say in the business that you ran, the business, the office space connecting platform, did you learn more about technology from running a technology business at that point? Or did you become a technologist at that stage? Or do you feel when you became a Salesforce professional, you still didn't have a technology background?
Well, that was basically, I was wearing many hats. I was not a technologist by any stretch of imagination. So because my job was to raise the money, which I did, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Then it was my job to hire people, and I had to also fire people. It was client relations, partner relations, all things of that nature. But of course, I had to test the product, and I had to work with developers. And I learned what user acceptance testing was. I learned the difference between the different environments and so on. So I guess the only way in which I was a technologist is that I also, well, I failed to mention this, I used to build websites on WordPress. So that's about as technical as I was, right? So that was, that certainly helped. I mean, it certainly introduced me to the whole idea of the software development lifecycle. But this was definitely in a whole different level. And so to go from pretty much not a technologist, but there are many stories like mine, where somebody is not a technical, doesn't have a technical background, ends up in Salesforce and becomes an admin. So I just went from nothing to sort of an admin, accidental, to a senior business analyst. And they gave me, I guess, the senior title, probably because of the age. I was 36 at the time. And so they said, okay, yeah, this guy's been around, so he understands at least business requirements. He knows how to talk to people, clients, so he can be client facing. And so, and my first project started in October. And in fact, no, November. It was November that year, because I remember I was still home for Halloween, and the next day I had to fly to Atlanta. And for my very first project, okay, imagine this, I was a senior business analyst and the project manager rolled into one. And there were a couple other people who were technically I was supposed to supervise on this project for a major American company. I just could not believe it. The only thing that felt familiar about this whole situation is that it was in Atlanta. And I went to high school in Atlanta. Back in 1994 to 97, I lived in Atlanta. So, of course, I went there and reconnected with my friends. We went to a couple of bars, had a great time. And then I flew back and so on. I worked on this project. I was like, wow, baptism by fire. Yeah, it was a successful project. It was, relatively small project by today's standards. But for me, it was basically I had to stay up until 2 a.m. For several months. But we got the job done, and the client was thankful. And it was a first successful project. I had the platform app builder cert that I also achieved at that same time. So that was 2016. Yeah, that was wild.
So what did going into that that consulting world, like how did that kind of launch you and your skill set to the next level, I guess, by going into the deep end and just being thrown in there to learn on the job and to establish yourself and grow? What did that do for you?
I realized that there's the right way to doing things, and then there is basically just figuring things out as you go and flying by the seat of your pants. And I didn't want to always fly by the seat of my pants. And I spoke to a whole lot of people, and because I was quickly assigned to the next project after that one. So in 2017, and I was on site, and I was part of a much larger team for a much larger client. So I had an opportunity to speak to a bunch of other architects and business analysts and developers and project managers and so on and so forth. And pretty much the entire kind of team. I spoke to many people in those various facets of different projects. And what appealed to me the most is the architectural role. Back then, I was also, it was like one of those corporate volunteer events. It was on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., where we were packing meals for disadvantaged or for the unhoused people at the time. So I was next to a guy with whom I spent a few hours packing meals, and he told me that he was a technical architect and he was going to go for his CTA. And that was the day I found out that there is such a thing as a CTA. And he said it was going to be very tough and so on. And I said, is there anything higher than the CTA? And he said, no, this is the pinnacle. And I remember thinking to myself, I wasn't so arrogant as to say, oh yeah, I'll do that too. Because, I just have the one cert at the time, or maybe two. But I remember thinking that, well, if there's nothing higher, I want that. So that never left me. So basically from then on, it was basically, I knew there was going to be a journey. And I'll tell you another pivotal point. So this is already 2017. I just remember I was back at the office near which I live right now. So the office was in McLean. This is actually the Salesforce building in Virginia. That's where that office was, across the street at the time. So this one gentleman who is a CTA, and he's a CTA judge. He was actually one of my judges in my last board. He just became a CTA at the time. And I remember he was just glowing with pride. He came back and he was very happy, and he was very proud of his achievement, but he was not prideful. He was very humble about it. And I remember seeing that he was just like so relieved and said, yes, I finally did it. And I said, so how many times did you have to go through this baptism? And he said 4 times. So it was 4 attempts for him. And I was just remember thinking, this really inspired me and energized me. Okay, and this was already 2017. So basically, then I just remember thinking, how am I going to do it? And this is when they introduced the prerequisites. And he didn't have to go through the prerequisites. And I was thinking, oh my God, this is going to be such a long slog. Just climbing up this pyramid, this certification pyramid. And it was, but actually that part was the easy part, was getting all the prerequisites. But yeah, I do remember that day that I was feeling very much inspired, and I said, I have to do this. So my second job, I was recruited out of Acumen Solutions, went to work at a different company, whereas I was also a senior business analyst. But what was different about that is I was basically on my own project where I was the sole everything. For a fairly small company. It was a water conservation company, but I had to design and architect and build my own solution. So I was literally the only guy there. It was like a staff augmentation type situation. So even though I was a senior business analyst by title, and I was really going through a kind of accelerated experience acquisition time in my life. And when that project was over, I said, is there a possibility of me becoming a solutions architect? Because I knew that was the next step. And they said, unfortunately, we don't have a need for such a role at the moment. And I thought about it like, okay, well, I guess somebody else will. And so I just remember I was I got a message from another recruiter at the company for which I was interviewed, and they gave me a shot at becoming a solutions architect. So I went to that company. And that company was acquired by Rackspace. And so I was a solutions architect there for almost 2 years. And I could see the writing on the wall where lots and lots of people started leaving Rackspace, and Rackspace got reorganized. And basically, they eventually divested themselves completely of the Salesforce practice. And I said to myself, okay, I'm going to try the next most interesting thing. So I tried my hand at CPQ. And as I was getting acclimated to CPQ, I was like, man, it's some very interesting stuff, but it's very kind of specialized. And I wanted to be a generalist, but I wanted to be the ultimate generalist, which I think that's what CTA is meant to be, kind of an ultimate generalist. And so I was knocking out these prerequisite certs. I think it was probably every 2 to 3 weeks, I would knock one out. And that year was probably about 6 certifications. So I was able to get to my application and system architect right at that same time. And then I said, well, guys, I'm going to learn CPQ, of course, because that's what you do, right? The original shift. But really, my heart is with the CTA. And they said, Unfortunately, we think that you will get there one day, but we just will never have a need for a CTA. And we will not be paying for the CTA review board. I said, okay, I understand. So we parted ways, and I went to a company which actually said, we will pay for your CTA education and for the board. And I'm like, great. So actually put it in the contract. So I started there as a solutions architect with some of the people with whom I used to work before were there. So that was familiar. That was easy. And these were true to the word. So they paid the $6,000 for Flow Republic. And so I started with Flow Republic, which I'm very grateful for, because it gave me, early on, it just showed that there's a structure to it. There's a method to it. So I took away two things from Flow Republic at the time as I started this company. Number one, I was told by Johan, with whom we're friends now, that I can do this. Like, he actually inspired me and said, look, it's not going to be easy. It's going to take you much longer than you think, but you can do this. You Svet personally can do this. I can see it in you. And then secondly, they taught us how to study together in a group. And it was also impossible to do this without doing this with someone else. So, and then I went on from running a few groups until I became CTA. So those are the two main things I took away from that. And of course, there was structure, but was it enough? No, it was 6 months of study, and this is like a really good introduction. But the real work started after that.
I want to go back to some of that journey, because I think it'll be interesting to some of the listeners. We'll go into the CTA part after, but you transitioned from a BA to a solution architect. And I guess in the terms of BA, like now, as the market has grown, the market's evolved, like we have very differentiated roles between like a BA and a functional consultant now. But when you were a BA, were you doing configuration?
Oh, yes. Yeah. From day one, I was doing configuration.
So then how, you said you went onto a project, you were a solution architect without any support really. Like how did you go from being a BA functional consultant to being a good architect? Because it can't have just been purely certs, right? Because a lot of that, like certs are great, but they're a lot of them are theory and studying, like you need that real life project experience to be a good architect. So what are the resources? Like how did you structure your learning to be a good architect before you even thought of, I'm going to be a CTA, like just being a good solution architect?
I'm not sure that was a good solution architect at that time. So I was working in the company, and I would ask for advice from some of the folks around me. However, there was no project manager with me. There was no deadline per se. So it was purely everything is in scope situation. It was probably one of the most fantastic experiences I could have asked for. The client itself, I mean, the CEO of the company, this very small company, I mean, she was not necessarily the easiest person to work with, but she was willing to try things without thinking about them too much. There was not a ton of time for analysis. Like, let's just give it a shot. Let's try it. Let's experiment. So she was not afraid of experimentation. And that was also scary at times, because I would learn that certain changes were introduced in production, and the way that I had built things all of a sudden weren't working. And I had to explain that there's no such thing as this is not connected to anything else. Everything is connected to everything else. Right. And so I learned very quickly what worked and what didn't. However, it was at the time I didn't even have time to study for certs. It was like before I ended up with admin, platform app builder, sales, and service cloud. So I had the 4. And once I was done with that project, I went for my advanced admin. But in between, there was no time for certs. It was like all hands-on learning. And a lot of times I would be doing config live on camera, 5 to 6 hours a day with the client, and then away from that. So it was very intense. it was very, very intense, but also very gratifying.
So did you look out for like mentors, or did you like look external as to like what a solution architect is, and like, because that's especially if you look at the path you've gone on since then, right? A lot of people would love to know, well, how do you go from being an admin and a BA to then we understand the CTA part because you've gone down Flow Republic, like you learn how to study, but like there's a gap in between of like, how do you become an architect first before you even run to being the CTA, or slowly crawl and jog and clamber your way there? Because I know that's a long journey. But were there resources, are there tips that you could share about becoming a good architect first and foremost?
I did not have that kind of support at the time. I was seeking it out. However, I can't say that I really had a mentor at that time. I was just basically said, okay, so I'm the one guy here. I really have to rely on myself. And I would spend some incredible amount of hours, even outside of work, working on the client project, not even billing them necessarily for the time, because I felt guilty. I said, I need to be able to know this to be able to charge the client for it. So I basically learned on the job without billing for all these hours. And I was told, well, you're actually working on the project, you should be billing these hours. And I said, yes, but at the same time, like, value for the time spent. And so I made up for it by, figuring things out on my own. When I went into the first job as a solutions architect, yes, there were other technical architects and solution architects I could lean on, but I was in multiple projects at the time. I didn't have the luxury of being on just one project, so there was a lot of things happening at the same time, and so it was basically, definitely more opportunities to ask for help and to be guided, but I was never sitting back and said, just, teach me, show me the ropes, just, guide me. I was always taking the initiative. Pretty much that's how I operate in general. So I take the initiative, and sometimes things don't go according to plan, but that's okay. But if things do get done, always.
We've obviously mentioned the fact you're not from a technical background per se. So what about that? Like, as you get on more complex projects, like going from being a clicks guy, like admin, BA, requirements gathering, to then designing complex, like heavily integrated, perhaps platforms with big data volume, stuff like that. Like, how did you become more technical in thinking?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So if you think about it, it took me 3.5 years for the whole CTA journey itself. So that's slightly less than half of my total Salesforce career. So the first half was just getting ready for it, and the second half was actually going through the journey and learning a lot. And that was the time of accelerated learning. And so as I started, I realized, okay, yeah, so I need to get better at things like DevOps. So I ended up working at Copado. And that was interesting. I was a program architect there. And I wanted to learn more about how to work on how do the managed packages get put together, right? So how do you design an application in Salesforce and then replicate it and sell it and so on. So I worked at a company that did that. So for me, it was more like, okay, so if I need to learn something, well, who are the best people in the world at doing that? So I would join that team. So I would have to be forced to learn a whole new skill, a whole new domain, if you will. And I had no choice but to really focus on that. When I started the CTA journey, first of all, you've heard this before, like, what is your why? Why do you even embark? Why do you want this so bad? Is it only because you have something to prove? Yes. So I first wanted to feel confident in the end result of my work. And I wanted to be absolutely sure that the way I'm building things, they're going to scale and they're going to survive the test of time. And so that was very important to me. Also, not having the technical background, not being a developer by education or experience, I said to myself, okay, well, I definitely need to achieve this so that I would see myself as like a real architect. And I would be forced to learn things very deeply and broadly, which is what CTA credential requires. And first and foremost, I would feel like, okay, so I have to prove to myself that I actually know what I'm talking about, that I actually know what I'm doing. And it would also help to have that credential so I would have that credibility with others as well. And so naively, I was thinking that, once I become a CTA, the whole imposter syndrome would go away. But realizing now that the more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't know, how much there is left to learn. And that's also a good thing, because the day that I stop learning is the day I die. So this so-called imposter syndrome, which, by the way, in psychological terms, is not a thing, right? That's not what psychologists call a real psychological concept. It never goes away, but it drives it. So you can either be afraid of it, or you could always kind of feed the beast or keep the beast at bay by learning something new. And so that's part of that partially drives me in my day-to-day work.
Yeah, and it seems to me like probably more so than some of the other conversations I've had around people that have gone for a CTA. Like you've very actively chosen companies based on that goal.
Yes,
which isn't that common. Like I speak to a lot of people that want to be a CTA and all, like, they might just target that they want to work for a big consulting firm because they're going to get big projects, or, they're going to stick around in their current company and hope that things change and hope that, a project lands that will help them with that goal of CTA. But you've looked at like, where are my weaknesses? What do I need to learn? Where are my gaps? And then chosen companies based on that. But then also that shows that you back yourself, because if you're not a DevOps specialist, to go and work at Copado must have been, you've got to talk them into giving you the job, which is a challenge in itself if you've not got that DevOps background. But then also be confident that you can learn that and that you can be a program architect in a big product company specializing in DevOps without that background.
Yeah, so it was all very fortuitous. So every single time I changed jobs, and I did this about 8 different times in 8 different years, that's a lot. Like you tell me you're a professional who places people in careers and jobs. So you probably agree with me that this is a lot. And I'm actually quite happy where I am right now. So planning on staying here for years if they'll have me. So I was fortunate in the way that, okay, so there was a reason why I needed a change. So for instance, one company I was at, they had me on 12 projects simultaneously. And I was supposed to also study for a CTA and have a life. It was just impossible. And I told them, I cannot do a good job on 12 projects simultaneously, even if I worked 24/7. And I said, this cannot go on. And they said, it's going to be fine. And I said, look, if it goes on, I'll quit. And I did. So Copado, actually, they reached out to me. They were building out the whole idea of a program architect. And they said, we'll get you to the point you need to be. So we have all these certs. So I spent at least the first 4 months going through fundamentals 1, 2, and also the consultant cert, and then the Copado robotic testing certification. So those I have as well, and I maintain them. Very useful because we do use Copado in my current position. The teams do. So it kind of worked out. The timing was also good. With these opportunities would show up, and I say, okay, does this align with my end goal? Yes. Is there a reason why I would switch to a different company at this time? Yes. So when those two clicked, then I would do that. And also the money kind of followed. So obviously I did progress in my earnings as well, but that was not the main reason why I changed. So it was all working towards a bigger, greater goal.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, because you need to find your feet in each new company as well, right? So like, it's not, I think if you've got that consistency with the company and they understand that you're studying, whereas if you're changing relatively regularly, like you need to prove yourself in those first few months and get some runs on the board. So you did mention, obviously, I think it was 2020, you started the journey with Flow Republic, and there were two main things you kind of learned through that experience. How did your CTA journey play out after that?
Well, naively at the time, I was thinking I was going to take like 6 months, right? So because I was used to knocking out this cert so quickly, and 6 months was going to be a long time. And then I quickly realized, no, that's going to take a lot longer. Just getting used to doing mocks consistently, that took a while. It was very scary at first. And then I got to the point where I was actually creating mocks, and I could do 2 a day, no problem. So my first attempt at the board was in 2022, and this was in like late October, I believe. And I passed 4 sections that day. I passed 4 sections. This is when you had a choice between doing it in person or virtually. So in person, I would have had to travel to New York, and I said, this is better. I'm just going to do it virtually. It was, the whole thing took 8 hours, start to finish. I was exhausted by the end of it. It took 8 hours because there were a few things that went wrong. I mean, they just started doing virtual boards, I believe, at that point. So there were technical issues and other types of issues. And so that was my first attempt. And I just remember thinking, well, I don't think I passed, but I'm hoping for a 2-section retake. And so I got the results. I think it was 2 weeks later, 2 agonizing weeks, and there was a full fail. But I was like, okay, well, at least I passed 4 sections, and everybody was encouraging me and saying like, hey, look, almost nobody. I mean, some people are super smart and lucky to be able to pass in the first try. Well, most people don't. So this is okay. They say you pass 4 sections. A lot of people don't pass any sections. So I said, okay, sure. So I'll definitely, I just remembered I really wanted to try again, like as quickly as possible. But then I said, it's, I need to put in more time to close the gaps. So that was in 2022. And then I joined Booz Allen, and Booz Allen actually gave us like probably the best support you could ask for, like very much personalized coaching. They paid for all of that. And it was a good solid year of being professionally coached, like unsurpassed level of coaching and opportunities, and basically gave me time to study, opportunity to try things, right, at on the various projects. It was a mature team, so we had the architectural review board. There was a whole governance body that I'm all used to. That very, very used to it by now. So everything has been kind of leveled up at a very grown-up level. Enterprise government projects, so like huge. Everything was, the scale was much greater. And then I repeated the attempt. It was a year and 2 weeks from the original attempt. And it was, of course, virtual. That was the only choice is a virtual one. And I had a partial pass, which is 5 sections. And so I just remember thinking, please, God, if it's a retake, I just want a 1-section retake because it's a lot easier than a 2-section retake. And I remember that I just came back in the morning from grocery shopping and I got the email. Oh no, it's a 2-section retake. It's like people were telling me it's actually easier to go for the full than the 2-section retake. Why? Because you get the full scenario and you have like half the time to do it, hour and a half. And it was data insecurity. So I remember thinking, well, at least it's not solution, because solution is like super open-ended. Like I can definitely focus on data insecurity. And so that's what I ended up passing finally. And so I passed. I mean, you really get this credential on whatever day that you get the email, or maybe a couple of days afterwards. So that's what goes on your certificate is the date that it basically gets becomes live in the system. But you're a CTA already, you just don't know it yet. So for me, it was March 12th of 2024. And I had to wait for 6 weeks to learn the results. 6 long weeks. Okay. And so that was a wonderful piece of news that I received. That day I just didn't feel like doing much. So it's evening time and I'm sitting watching TV. It's just like random YouTube videos, something about travel. And then my Apple Watch dings. And I kind of glance at it idly. So it's a reflex. It dings, you look at it, right? I look at it, it says review board results. I'm like, what? And then I start scrolling on the watch and I see the word congratulations and then it gets cut off. I'm like, so I'm shaking now. So I reach for the phone, just like, can it be? So I'm in disbelief, right? And so then I read the email. And of course, just like you, some of you other podcast participants said, like, you had to read it and reread it and get the feedback. I'm like, oh my God, I actually passed. So then I just ran up a couple of stories in our house. And I know my wife, my daughter, they just got finished, taking showers. And I'm just shoving the phone in their face. I'm like, and they're like, what happened? And I said, I passed. And they're like, oh my God. So we were just like jumping up and down. And it was an awesome moment. So that was April 30th. Because I know that's the one cert that I have on my wall that I printed out and framed. So that was definitely a happy occasion, a happy evening.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I think one thing I've learned over the years of speaking to CTAs on the podcast, it is a family experience because of the amount of time and effort that everyone has to accept is going to go into it. Like if your family aren't on board with it, your friends and family, then it's not going to work for you.
For sure. Even now they said, so like we all took this board 3 times. It wasn't just you. I said, absolutely. So I couldn't have done it without their support.
I know you mentioned like imposter syndrome is still a thing, but what, like day to day, what's different for you now?
The number one thing that changed very positively is that I have so much more time now because I don't have to invest in knowledge acquisition and preparing for the CTA, which seems like a never-ending process when you're in it. And so I'm able to apply a lot of the concepts that I learned to my day-to-day work. I'm able to share with that. With others, and it's very frequent that I actually have to go in front of the architectural review board of the governance body, which is not our company, and I have to present the solution, and I have to talk about, okay, so this is a security risk, and this is how we're mitigating the risk, and this is what we're going to do, and they can ask me anything. So it's just like a tiny mini board, and I feel confident that in fact, I have one of those tomorrow. So I feel confident that I know how to prepare. I know what to say. I know when to stop speaking. I know how to listen for their questions. And if somebody is being, like, let's say somebody is not on their best day and they're irritated by something, but I happen to be the guy whom they need to address in the moment. And I don't take that personally because the board has prepared, the whole journey prepared me for all of this. And had I not gone through this whole experience, I would have gotten there, but probably would have taken longer. But so far, I'm able to say to the team, you guys don't worry about these bits and pieces. I will get us the necessary approvals. Just do the best work that you possibly can. And I have your back. I'll be your windshield, so to speak. I'll shield you from the external influences, shall we say. And it definitely gives you an edge, I'd like to say. And there's still so much more left to learn, for sure. But yeah, I'm definitely, I can't say that I know everything best. There's no such thing, right? So because I also go in front of our internal architectural review board, I serve on the board. So in fact, we did one of those today. Where I'm able to offer some of my feedback. But there's 4 CTAs now at Booz Allen. A year ago, a year and change, there were not. And so 3 of us became CTAs, and a good friend of mine actually joined Booz Allen. So one joined already being a CTA, and 3 of us became CTAs. And so that, and more in the pipeline, of course. So just because it's such a nurturing environment, and it's a great CTA program. So what has changed? So those 2 main things. So I have more time to try other things, and I feel definitely a lot more grounded in any time that there's some kind of complexity. I know that I may not have the right answer at that moment, that I know how to get there and whom to talk to and so on.
Yeah, awesome. And you mentioned continual learning, like you can't know everything. Dreamforce has just been, it was just around the corner. And did you go?
Yes, I was there. I was there this time. So yeah, fantastic time. So this was my second time at Dreamforce, and I went there primarily to reconnect with some of the folks that I only get to see like this. And hopefully you and I will meet in person one of these days. And so that was the main reason. But of course, I was there for the architect keynote. I've seen some of the other keynotes, and we do realize that a lot that Salesforce showcases during Dreamforce is like one giant marketing event. So and it's fun, and of course you just feed off of the energy of other people, and they do introduce shiny new wonderful technology, which is super seductive. Now, in the federal space, when you're working with the U.S. government, a lot of these things come later because they need to go through the approval process. So we can't really use that. We can't take advantage of some of these technologies like Agentforce, for instance. Doesn't mean we won't be able to. It's just it'll come later. But I am very excited about Data Cloud. Definitely excited about Agentforce. So I'll be investing some of my time in learning those and getting those certifications. It's kind of like, I think every CTA does this. Once they get the credential, they say, okay, I'm just going to take a break for a while and not get a new certs. I think I'm at the point where it's time to start again. I'd say 5. Yeah, exactly. So it's 5 months. I kind of miss it, but I'm still there for some friends who are going for CTA, and judging those mocks and then having conversations, and I try to inspire. In fact, I'm quite active in Architect Ohana, which is probably the world's largest architect-specific community. It's on Slack, and it was started by Melissa Sherwood, who I'm sure you know, to help people learn how to become CTA, and that's when I joined. So, I'm one of the admins there, and happy to grow that community. Very, very active there myself. So that has nothing to do with work.
I was going to say, where's the best place for people to reach out and ask you questions? But would that be if they're on that architect journey to join the Salesforce? The Architect Ohana?
So Architect Ohana is it's a Slack group. So first of all, how do you even find that? So yes, you could go on LinkedIn, and there's Architect Ohana, but you could find me on LinkedIn for sure. But I decided I'm actually going to make it like really, really easy for folks to find me, not without having to just be able to spell my name. So it's a shameless plug. But I registered a domain called lucidcta.com. And so soon I'll put out the website, and that's just going to be a very simple way to get in touch with me. And so I'll have my LinkedIn credentials, and here, this is how you become part of Architect Ohana, and so on and so forth. So, and the reason I called it that is because, first of all, I love Lucidchart. That's my go-to tool for diagramming. I love diagramming. And so when I had my first ever evaluation before even Flow Republic, I used Lucidchart. I passed the CTA with Lucidchart. The word itself, I think, is a very positive word. It means being clear. So speaking clearly, representing concepts clearly, and so on. So it was available. So it's lucidcta.com. So stay tuned. That's coming. So that would be probably the best way to find me.
Going back to your roots of WordPress development?
Yes, exactly. So I was just actually looking at the different WordPress themes, and you already have the host. Everything is set up. I know how to do this. It's very comfortable. So it shouldn't take long. It's just something I've been thinking about.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to hear more about your journey. And yeah, I'll make sure that we mention the new website that's coming in the show notes. And encourage anyone to reach out and ask you any questions that they have. So thank you.
I really appreciate it. It's a pleasure. And thank you for the thoughtful questions.
My pleasure.